As of 2026, over 3.32 billion people actively play video games worldwide. Because of that, I think it's impossible to ignore the social impact games now have on people and society. When most people think about video games, they probably think about entertainment first, just a way to relax after school or work. But honestly, through both personal experience and researching this topic, I've realised games are so much more than that. Games influence the way people connect with each other, how communities are formed, and even the way people see themselves and others. Gaming has become one of the biggest entertainment industries in the world, which means the industry has a huge influence on culture, representation, and social interaction. So in this video, I'll be exploring the social impact of games through three main areas: EDI, playtesting, and nationality and ethnicity within the games industry. Because while games can bring people together and introduce players to new ideas and perspectives, they can also reflect many of the same inequalities and issues that exist within wider society. And I think that contradiction is what makes this discussion so important. The first area I want to discuss is equality, diversity, and inclusion, also known as EDI. Personally, I think EDI matters because games influence identity and belonging more than people think. When players see characters or stories that reflect their own experiences, it can create strong senses of recognition that people often underestimate. EDI is also important legally through laws like the Equality Act of 2010, but I think it should mean more than simply meeting requirements. One quote that stood out during my research was, "Diversity isn't just a buzzword, it's a fundamental principle driving innovation and success." I genuinely agree with that because diversity actively improves creativity within games. Different cultures create different stories, perspectives, and gameplay ideas, which is one of the reasons gaming has become such a globally successful industry. Gaming audiences are also becoming more diverse. The number of players over the age of 50 has increased by over 12 million in the last 6 years, representing a 30% increase. Developers now need to understand wider audiences and create games that feel welcoming to more communities. One company I researched was Sega. Sega introduced initiatives such as Sega Pride, Women at Sega, and Rise at Sega, which supports ethnic minorities, women, and members of the LGBTQ community within the company. I think initiatives like these can positively impact both workplaces and gaming communities because developers who feel accepted are more likely to create games that reflect wider perspectives. However, despite these positives, there is still criticism surrounding EDI within gaming. Some companies promote diversity more for public image than genuine care. For example, many studios advertise basic diversity training, but honestly, I think that should be considered the bare minimum rather than a major achievement. An Empower Up survey highlighted several ongoing issues within the industry. Around 20% of respondents stated their workplace had no EDI programs at all, while only 38% reported having a formal complaint procedure for EDI issues, and just 28% had a formal disciplinary process. At the same time, 85% of respondents believed diversity in both workplaces and game content was important. However, around 67% still felt there was not equal treatment and opportunity within the industry. Personally, I think these statistics reveal a major contradiction. Most employees clearly value inclusion, but many companies still do not treat EDI as a significant priority. There is also backlash surrounding EDI initiatives online. Some studios face criticism from players who view representation or diversity programs as political. Large AAA companies are usually able to recover from this backlash because they have larger budgets and multiple projects, but indie developers are often much more vulnerable financially. Sega's workforce statistic also showed a gender split of around 63% men to 37% women, showing that women still remain underrepresented within many areas of game development. Overall, I think EDI has had a positive social impact because it encourages representation, inclusivity, and creativity, but at the same time, the industry still struggles with performative activism and unequal opportunity. The next area I want to discuss is playtesting and the role it plays in shaping the social impact of games. At first, playtesting may seem like a technical part of development focused on fixing bugs or improving gameplay. However, through my research, I found it has become much more socially important as gaming audiences continue to grow and diversify globally. Because games are interactive experiences, developers need to understand how different audiences respond to gameplay, stories, and online interactions. Playtesting allows studios to gather feedback from a wide range of players, helping improve accessibility, usability, and overall player experience before release. I also think there are wider benefits from the industry itself. Diverse games naturally attract larger and more varied audiences because more players are able to relate to the content being created. Personally, I think playtesting is one of the most important stages of development because it gives developers perspectives they may not have considered themselves. When developers involve people from different backgrounds in testing, they gain outside perspectives that can help improve their game. For example, disabled players may notice accessibility problems that developers overlooked, while players from different cultures may identify stereotypes or inaccurate portrayals. So in many ways, diversity within development teams and playtesting can directly improve the quality and accessibility of games. However, there are still criticisms surrounding playtesting. Large AAA studios have far greater resources to gather audience feedback than indie developers, meaning smaller studios may struggle to fully understand broader audiences even if they want to create inclusive experiences. There is also criticism that some developers rely too heavily on player feedback, potentially prioritizing avoiding controversy over creative freedom. Different audiences often want completely different things from the same game, making it completely difficult for developers to balance community expectations with their own vision. Overall, I believe playtesting has had a largely positive social impact because it encourages developers to think more carefully about player experience and accessibility throughout development. The final area I want to discuss is nationality and ethnicity within the games industry itself. During my research, I noticed something that honestly felt contradictory. The games industry constantly presents itself as global, but when you actually look at who gets presented in industry research and decision making, the picture becomes much narrower. For example, the 2025 State of the Industry report describes itself as representing the global game development community. However, no African or Asian countries were polled, while over half the respondents came from the United States. One thing I found really interesting was how positive the results can be when companies genuinely involve different cultures in development. A good example of this is The Sims 4 and its expansion pack, Royalty and Legacy, inspired by African culture. Maxis and EA worked alongside African studios like Leti Arts and Usuku Games, as well as consultants from the Pan-African Gaming Group, to help create the world and create inspiration behind the expansion. One quote connected to that collaboration really stood out to me. True representation is not a tick box. And personally, I think that perfectly explains what meaningful inclusion actually looks like. EA stated that consultants from West African backgrounds were involved through development, including research, reviews, and production feedback. To me, that is far more meaningful than simply adding representation for appearances. However, there are still major gaps within the industry itself. Even in the 2026 State of the Industry report, while there was a slight increase polling in Asian countries like China and Japan, not a single country in Africa was included again. Half the respondents were born in the United States, while 54% currently live there, suggesting increased immigration within the industry. However, 67% of respondents working in the US games industry identify as white. Personally, I think this limits creativity more than the industry realizes. One experience that personally changed my perspective on this was learning more about Asian game development. While researching, I looked into the game Raji, an ancient epic which is heavily inspired by Indian culture and mythology. What made this especially meaningful to me was I actually had the opportunity to speak personally with developer Ian Maud while working on my portfolio. That conversation genuinely opened my eyes to how large and diverse the game industry really is outside of Western spaces. He spoke to me about the challenges and opportunities within Asian game development, and it made me realise how many stories and perspectives still go unnoticed globally, simply because Western markets dominate most industry discussions. And honestly, I think that's why representation behind the scenes matters just as much as representation within games themselves. Because when developers from different cultures are given opportunities to create, players experience completely new ideas, art styles, mythologies, and perspectives that they otherwise may never have encountered. So overall, I think nationality and ethnicity within the games industry reveal both the positives and negatives of gaming's social impact and shows how games have the power to connect cultures and introduce people to experiences from across the world. In conclusion, I think games have a huge social impact whether people realise it or not. Researching EDI showed me both the positives and negatives of the industry's social influence. Representation can help people feel recognised and included, but many companies still struggle to move beyond performative diversity. Playtesting highlighted how important player feedback has become in shaping modern games, helping developers create more welcoming and accessible experiences while also creating challenges around creative freedom and player expectations. The nationality and ethnicity research stood out to me the most. My research proved how well games can be when there is a large range of different people from different backgrounds who get a say in development. Games are no longer just entertainment. They influence communities, identity, representation, and the way people understand different cultures and perspectives. I believe the social impact of games is largely positive because games can connect people, encourage creativity, and introduce players to new perspectives and experiences. But if gaming is going to continue shaping culture on such a massive scale, then the industry itself needs to genuinely reflect the diverse global audience that plays its games.